Civilizations rise, vanish, and are born again, each believing itself the first to awaken. Yet beneath the layers of time lies a deeper story, written not in words, but in stone, metal, and myth. Around the world, traces of impossible craftsmanship endure. Cities aligned to the stars, maps that knew the shape of unseen continents, instruments that measured the heavens long before recorded history began. Who built them? How did they know what we have only recently rediscovered? The answers hide in fragments pulled from the sea. Each one speaks of knowledge that should not have existed, and of a lineage that somehow did. Long before kings, before copper or script, someone lifted a stone and shaped it to purpose. It was not art yet, nor religion. It was memory made solid. Across continents and ages, that same impulse appeared again and again. People who had never met, who could never have known one another, looked to the sky, drew lines upon the earth, and began to build. What they left behind still confounds the science meant to explain them. The first spark of invention is buried in darkness, not the darkness of ignorance, but of time itself. From the obsidian workshops of Anatolia to the volcanic plains of the Americas, ancient craftsmen learned to tame fire and fracture. They struck glass from stone so sharp it could split a hair. Modern engineers have measured those blades and found edges finer than today's surgical steel. Whoever made them understood heat, rhythm, and pressure, knowledge that should have taken millennia to develop, yet it appeared in a world without writing or metal. Around 9,500 BC, a circle of pillars rose from the soil of southeastern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. It should not exist. Its carvings, its balance, its scale, all belong to a civilization we are told had not yet begun. The site is older than agriculture, older than cities, older than belief systems as we define them. Yet it was built with perfect symmetry and astronomical intent. The central pillars frame the rising of specific stars, their shapes echoing constellations. Some researchers say it was the first temple, others that it was something stranger, a kind of instrument designed to mark the turning of heaven itself. When its builders finished, they buried it carefully, as if protecting their own secret. Then they vanished. Centuries turned into millennia. Across Europe and Asia, others began to raise stones, not crude markers, but monuments set with geometric precision. The alignments recur like a signature written across the planet. In Brittany, at Karnak, thousands of megaliths stand in perfect rows, stretching beyond sight. In Britain, circles like Stonehenge were tuned to the solstice with astonishing accuracy. The builders knew the rhythm of the sun and the tilt of the earth. They tracked eclipses and moonrise angles as if time itself were a language they had learned to speak in stone. But who taught them? No records remain, no teachers' names, only the stones, silent, deliberate, mathematically alive. In the high Andes, across the ocean, the same geometry appears again. Walls of perfectly interlocked blocks, surfaces so smooth that even a razor blade cannot pass between them. These patterns were not born of accident. They follow principles: gravity management, vibration control, resonance. The earth was their textbook and the stars their calendar. Different worlds, one code. Yet some relics suggest an even deeper inheritance. The trace of technologies lost long before any known empire. One of them was drawn, not built. In 1513, the Ottoman admiral Piri Reis composed a map from sources older than memory. He claimed to have copied fragments preserved since the time of Alexander. When scholars examined it centuries later, they found a coastline no one should have known. the outline of Antarctica without its ice. Modern surveys reveal that the features match the landmass as it would have appeared 12,000 years ago. Whoever first charted that line saw the Earth from above, as if the curvature itself were measured. No ancient voyage explains it. No surviving tradition records it. It is a glimpse, a whisper of knowledge carried through flood and fire, finally redrawn on parchment in an empire that did not yet know what it held. Another artifact was hidden beneath the Aegean waves. Fishermen diving near the island of Antikythera surfaced with a tangle of corroded bronze. Inside it lay gears, interlocking, with a precision unseen again until the Renaissance. When the fragments were restored, they revealed a mechanical computer built in the age of Aristotle. The device predicted eclipses, lunar phases, even planetary motion, all driven by a single hand crank. Its craftsmanship is microscopic. Some of its ratios are accurate to within fractions of a degree. And then, nothing. No copies. No evolution. As if the knowledge that made it had appeared from nowhere, then disappeared the same way. In the plateaus of central Anatolia, deep beneath layers of volcanic rock, another mystery sleeps. Whole underground cities spiral into the earth, Derinkuyu, Kaimakli, and others still uncounted. They descend through kilometers of tunnels, equipped with air shafts, wells, and vast stone doors that could seal thousands inside. No one knows who carved them or when. Some believe they were sanctuaries from invaders. Others whisper of older cataclysms, fire from the sky, floods that turned mountains to islands. Their builders understood airflow, water control, and the weight of the earth itself. The stones bear no tool marks. The surfaces are smooth, as if shaped by heat or vibration. Entire communities could survive there for months, perhaps years, protected from whatever disaster raged above. It suggests not desperation, but planning, foreknowledge of something they expected to return. When all these clues are placed side by side, the carvings that track the stars, the blades of glass sharper than steel, the map that knows the unseen, the mechanism that measures the sky, the cities that hide beneath the ground, a pattern begins to form. It is not the story of isolated genius. It is the echo of a memory too vast to belong to one place or one time. A memory of a world that once understood far more than we allow ourselves to imagine. Every age believes it is the first to awaken. Yet beneath our foundations, the evidence says otherwise. Someone had already learned to read the heavens. Someone had already measured the planet. Someone had already built with the kind of precision we only rediscovered after forgetting. They are gone now. Their names erased, their language silenced, but their design endures. A carved line in the desert, a star framed through stone, a mechanism waiting to turn, each a fragment of the same message, carried through millennia of ruin. We were here. We understood, and we tried to remember. The ocean keeps its secrets better than stone. What the land remembers through ruins, the sea buries in silence. Yet across the world's oldest myths, there are stories that sound like memories. Fragments of a vanished south, a world of islands and empires drowned before history began. Long before anyone spoke of Atlantis, sailors from India to Polynesia told of continents that had once risen from the deep. They called them Lemuria or Mu, names born much later, but describing something older still. They spoke of a land of light and water, where people mastered navigation when the stars were still strange, and where knowledge itself was a tide that eventually withdrew. To modern ears, they sound like legends. But beneath those legends lie clues too precise to ignore. In the Indian Ocean, Tamil traditions recall a kingdom called Kumari Kandam, said to have stretched far beyond the southern tip of India before the sea claimed it. Ancient poems speak of cities with gardens of crystal, of astronomers who charted constellations no longer visible in the northern sky. Some say their descendants fled inland after the flood, carrying their sciences into early Dravidian temples, knowledge disguised as ritual. Far to the east, in the vastness of the Pacific, Polynesian oral histories echo the same theme. Islands lost to storms, lands that sank with their people still singing. The Maori tell of Hawaii, the homeland beneath the waves. Hawaiian chants remember Ka Moana Kai Uli, the blue-black sea that swallowed their ancestors. The names change, but the pattern does not. A southern world that vanished, leaving memories scattered like shells along the shore. It would be simple to dismiss all this as coincidence until the maps appear. 16th and 17th century charts show strange landmasses in the southern oceans, drawn long before explorers reached Antarctica. Some bear coastlines uncannily close to modern satellite contours. Most cartographers of the time admitted their ignorance. They had copied older models. Where had those originals come from? One name recurs: the lost southern continent. Theories multiplied, claiming it was needed to balance the globe, a counterweight to the known world. But perhaps the myth persisted because someone, long ago, had already seen it. Beneath the Indian Ocean, sonar scans reveal the ghost outlines of ancient plateaus. Land once above water, before the last ice age ended around 10,000 BC. At the same time, underwater ridges off the coast of India and Indonesia show geometric formations that resemble walls, terraces, and stairways. Not proof, not yet, but suggestion. In 2002, divers exploring the Gulf of Cambay discovered a submerged site covering several square kilometers. The sonar images showed symmetrical foundations, streets, and what appeared to be basins and docks. Carbon samples dated nearby artifacts to nearly 9,000 years old, long before the Indus cities. The discovery was met with caution, then silence. The ocean, as always, kept its counsel. The idea of Lemuria began not in myth, but in science. In the 19th century, zoologists noticed that fossils of the same lemur species existed in both Madagascar and India, but nowhere in between. They proposed a lost land bridge to explain it, and called it Lemuria. But what began as a biological hypothesis soon merged with something older. Theosophists, mystics, and early explorers of comparative myth took the name and filled it with memory. An antediluvian civilization, radiant and advanced, undone by its own power. The deeper one looks, the more these threads intertwine. Geology, archaeology, mythology. In Indonesia, the island of Sundaland lies upon a drowned continental shelf, once a vast region of fertile plains. Its submersion at the end of the last ice age would have displaced millions, forcing migration north and west. Genetic studies trace sudden expansions of human populations around that very time, radiating from the region once called the Lost South. The flood myths that follow, from India's Manu to Noah, from Gilgamesh to the Polynesian Maui, may all echo that single planetary event when seas rose and the world's map changed forever. If that was the real Lemuria, its people did not vanish. They adapted, carrying fragments of their lost world into the civilizations that would come after. Their monuments may survive only as whispers, step terraces now beneath coral, or foundations mistaken for natural ridges. but their memory lingers in symbols of water and rebirth, in the recurring image of the serpent or dragon that coils around the earth, guarding the knowledge of beginnings. Some researchers believe Lemuria's builders were master navigators, the first to map the Pacific before the Polynesians, guided by the stars and magnetic patterns of the sea. Micronesian stick charts, intricate lattices of shell and fiber, preserve a method of reading ocean swells and star lines. The principle behind them, geometry, resonance, and wave interference, belongs as much to physics as to folklore. It is tempting to think that such precision did not appear suddenly, but was inherited from something older, something systematic, a science that could sail by starlight long before compasses existed. In oral tradition, the southern peoples did more than travel. They built. Legends from Java, Tonga, and Easter Island speak of temples and causeways made of coral limestone, cut and lifted as though weight meant nothing. On the island of Nan Madol, megalithic walls rise from a lagoon, built of basalt columns stacked in interlocking grids. Each piece weighs several tons, yet they float upon water-soaked foundations with perfect balance. How that was achieved, or why, remains unanswered. The local name for the place translates simply as the City of the Spirits. What if Lemuria and Mu were not single continents, but a network, a seaborne civilization strung across islands now drowned or eroded? Their empire would have been fluid, moving with tides, defined not by borders, but by routes of wind and current. To such a people, the ocean would not be an obstacle, but a medium, a highway of stars reflected on waves. In that vision, the myths make sudden sense. The sinking of their world might not have been one instant of disaster, but a slow retreat, coastlines swallowed year by year, temples half drowned, harbors turned to reefs. The catastrophe would have unfolded within memory, its trauma encoded in the oldest human stories. To later generations, those tales became warnings, reminders of a time when the sea itself rose against its makers. Across time, the pattern repeats: brilliance, catastrophe, silence. The same rhythm that ended Lemuria would echo in later ages. Atlantis, Thera, the Bronze Age collapse. Civilizations unmade by their own element. In the story of the South, the sea is both cradle and destroyer, concealing the evidence of what it once allowed to thrive. Somewhere below the surface, amid coral and darkness, may still lie the traces of that first oceanic empire, channels cut through limestone, monoliths etched by forgotten tools, symbols worn into stone by centuries of current. The technology that built them, if it existed, would not have been crude. It would have been adapted to water, vibration, magnetism, and sound. Perhaps that is why nothing remains on land. Perhaps the earth itself erased its blueprint to begin again. The ocean is the oldest archive on earth, but it hides its pages well. Every tide rewrites the past, every current rearranges what was known. Yet when the waves fall silent, a faint outline appears. A memory of builders who measured their world not by land, but by the movement of the sea. They are gone now, their islands erased from maps. But in every myth of flood and light, their reflection survives. Maybe Lemuria and Mu were never places at all. Maybe they were the name we give to the first time humanity looked across the horizon and realized how small the land truly was, and how vast the unknown could be. Every civilization carries a memory of one that came before. To the Greeks, that memory had a name, Atlantis, a world that rose from the sea, radiant and ordered, only to be swallowed again when its people forgot the limits of their power. Plato claimed it was no fable. He said it was history, a warning disguised as allegory. But the more carefully he described it, the less it resembled a myth. He spoke of engineers and astronomers, of cities laid out in rings, earth and water alternating like the gears of a vast machine. At its center, a temple shone with the light of orichalcum, a metal said to glow like fire. Canals cut across the land in concentric circles, feeding into harbors where ships sailed by tides rather than oars. Above them, towers rose from the plain, capped with crystal domes that caught and refracted sunlight. It was an empire of precision, a place where geometry had become religion. Plato set the island beyond the pillars of Heracles, somewhere past the narrow strait we now call Gibraltar. Later generations would map it onto every ocean, the Azores, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean floor. But in his telling, Atlantis was not just a location. It was an idea, a civilization that had mastered nature itself, and in doing so, sealed its fate. Whether he drew from older Egyptian accounts or from his own imagination, his description feels too detailed to be invention alone. The dimensions, the measurements, the materials, all recounted with the calm of a surveyor, not a poet. He claimed the tale came from Solon, who had learned it from priests at Sais, that the Atlanteans had once conquered much of the known world before the gods struck them down. It was said to have happened 9,000 years before his time, around the same age as the drowned cities now found off India's coast. Coincidence, perhaps, or memory, wearing the mask of myth. Some researchers suggest Atlantis was an echo of the Minoan world, Crete before the eruption of Thera. Its palaces, with their running water, light wells, and vivid murals, fit the image of a civilization of art and engineering. When Thera exploded around 1600 BC, its ash and tidal waves shattered the Aegean. For centuries, the story of that destruction would have been retold, reshaped, and finally remembered as divine punishment. Yet the myth of Atlantis feels larger than that, as if it carried a deeper layer, a blueprint of something even older, remembered through the Greeks' inherited awe. Plato's city, with its canals and central temple, mirrors not only Minoan Crete, but also ancient Mesopotamian design. Ziggurats rising from the center of floodplains, surrounded by ordered rings of irrigation. The pattern is universal, water-controlled, then lost. What makes Atlantis unique is the notion that its people used power beyond human scale. Later accounts, drawn from mystics and early scientists, expanded the tale into speculation. They described energy crystals that channeled the planet's magnetism, mirrors that concentrated sunlight into beams, aerial craft driven by vibration. To modern ears, these sound like fantasy, yet fragments of them survive in older symbolism. The Egyptian Benben stone, the Greek omphalos, the Hindu lingam, all objects said to focus energy between heaven and earth. If Atlantis existed, perhaps it was not defined by its geography, but by its technology, the way it harnessed natural forces that later generations could not understand. The remains of that knowledge might not be machines, but myths, encoded through metaphor. A crystal of power could be a lens, a mirror, an experiment in resonance. A chariot of the air might describe sound, magnetism, or light. The vocabulary of prehistory is poetic because language had not yet learned to describe the mechanical. For those who search beneath the waves, there are hints but no certainties. In 2011, sonar imaging off the coast of Spain revealed symmetrical shapes beneath layers of sediment, structures aligned to cardinal points, too regular to be chance. Off Cuba, researchers found a plateau, nearly 2,000 feet below sea level, scattered with stone formations resembling streets and pyramids. No expedition has yet confirmed them, but the imagery remains difficult to explain. Whether natural formation or lost architecture, the effect is the same. They look like a memory trying to surface. Even if Atlantis was never real, the myth contains a truth older than itself, that knowledge can destroy as easily as it creates. The Atlanteans, Plato said, had forgotten humility. They sought to command the heavens, to reshape the earth. Until the balance broke, the sea reclaimed what they had built in a single day and night of storms and fire. 'Tis the archetype of hubris, the moment when invention outpaces wisdom. In every age, the story repeats. The Bronze Age collapse, the fall of Rome, the dark centuries after the Library of Alexandria, cycles of brilliance followed by silence. Atlantis may simply be the first record of that pattern, a memory of a civilization that reached too far and paid the price, written down so the next might hesitate before doing the same. Still, what remains most haunting in Plato's description is not the punishment, but the beauty. The image of a world perfectly engineered, every structure reflecting a cosmic order. His Atlantis is not chaos before the flood. It is equilibrium at its peak. The disaster comes only when harmony turns to pride. It is as if he were describing a law of nature, that civilizations, like stars, shine brightest before they collapse. Modern archaeologists approach the myth differently. To them, it is a narrative lens, a way of seeing how ancient peoples imagined catastrophe. But even they admit that scattered evidence of advanced pre-Diluvian cultures keeps surfacing, often in places once dismissed as barren. Off Japan's Yonaguni coast, a submerged terrace bears right angles too sharp for coral growth. Along the Bahama bank, stone formations trace grid-like paths beneath shallow water. None of these prove Atlantis. Yet together, they suggest that humanity's story beneath the sea may be longer than we remember. If the tale endures, it is because it speaks to something universal, the fear that progress itself carries the seed of its undoing. The Atlanteans built wonders. They mastered energy, metal, navigation, astronomy. But they forgot the silence that must stand beside knowledge. In that forgetting, they became mirrors of us. The city fell, the waters closed, and the sea floor kept their inventions. Perhaps the world needs such losses to begin again. For every age that rises builds upon a ghost, and the ruins of Atlantis, real or imagined, remain the first and greatest warning ever written in water. When the sea fell silent, the mountains began to speak. Across the continents, the next chapter of human ingenuity rose not from the depths, but from the earth itself, from quarries, deserts, and plateaus, where stone became the measure of eternity. The builders of this age left no writing to explain themselves, only monoliths that refuse to erode, walls that mock the passing of time. To look upon them is to feel that someone, somewhere, once solved the problem of permanence. From the cedar valleys of Lebanon to the ridges of the Andes, colossal blocks rest where no tool of their supposed era should have lifted them. The ancients who came after could only stare in awe. They called these works cyclopean, imagining that one-eyed giants had done what men could not. Yet behind every myth of giants hides the shadow of forgotten engineers. In the ruins of Baalbek, a Roman temple stands upon a foundation so vast that even Rome could not explain it. Beneath the known structure lie 3 stones, each weighing more than 1,000 tons, joined so precisely that a knife blade cannot slip between them. Nearby, still half buried, rests the so-called stone of the pregnant woman. Heavier than all the rest, cut from the quarry as if by some vanished method of levitation or balance. No inscription names its maker. No record claims the design. The Romans built above it, not from it, as if inheriting a platform meant for gods. Far across the ocean, high in the Andes, the same mastery appears in Sacsayhuaman, a fortress of interlocking polygons. Each stone curves and angles into its neighbors like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle. There is no mortar, no binding agent, only fit, pressure, and gravity. Earthquakes that shattered Spanish cathedrals left those walls untouched. Their joints flex, but never break. Engineers today can explain the principles, but not the precision by which they were achieved. To carve such shapes from andesite requires tools harder than iron, yet none have been found. At Pumapunku, on the shores of Lake Titicaca, blocks lie scattered as if an explosion had frozen them mid-flight. Each bears machine-like grooves and right angles, the remains of an architecture that seems to have understood both aesthetics and mechanics. Local legend claims the city was built in a single night by the gods Viracocha and his helpers. The Inca themselves said they found it already ancient when they arrived. Beneath the myths lies a truth. Whoever built Pumapunku worked with measurements finer than a hair's width, joining stone as if it were metal. The same enigma echoes in Egypt, where the Great Pyramid of Giza rises not merely as tomb, but as theorem. Its base aligns almost perfectly to the cardinal points. Its slope mirrors the ratio of the Earth's circumference to its polar diameter. Its core blocks, weighing dozens of tons, fit so closely that modern lasers detect gaps smaller than a millimeter. Scholars debate its purpose: royal monument, observatory, or power plant. But all agree on one fact. It should not have been possible with the tools of its time. Copper chisels and ropes cannot produce that symmetry. Somewhere between quarry and plateau, an older science intervened. To move such stones required more than manpower. Archaeologists have proposed sleds drawn over wet sand, ramps spiraling upward, counterweights shifting with each ascent. Perhaps they are right. Yet even those explanations demand coordination, mathematics, and knowledge of material stress far beyond primitive trial and error. Each project implies a culture organized around precision: masons, surveyors, astronomers, hydraulic engineers. These were not the labors of slaves. They were national endeavors in pursuit of something sacred. Across Europe, other monoliths rise like punctuation marks of the same forgotten grammar. Stonehenge, with its lintels poised on standing pillars, aligns to the midsummer sunrise and midwinter moon. The builders transported the bluestones from quarries more than 100 miles away, crossing rivers and plains without the wheel. The circle is both calendar and sanctuary, a place where time could be seen. When the sun reached its highest arc, the stones framed its path precisely, a conversation between human hands and celestial order. The pattern repeats across continents. In Malta, megalithic temples stand older than the pyramids, oriented to equinox light that floods their inner chambers only twice a year. In Ethiopia, obelisks carved from single blocks rise from Aksum's soil, their faces etched with windows and doors to mimic buildings of the living. In Japan, the Ishibutai tomb rests upon slabs so immense that they form natural arches, balanced without cement or nail. Every site speaks the same language of endurance: stone aligned with star, mass balanced by geometry. What purpose demanded such precision? To modernize, these monuments seem excessive for ritual alone. Their builders might have sought to bind heaven and earth in structure, to capture the rhythm of the cosmos in solid form. Many are oriented to solstice sunrise, to lunar standstill, to the point where shadow vanishes. It is as though ancient architects understood that time itself could be measured through light. When the first ray struck a particular niche, the year began anew. These were not temples merely of worship, but of observation, machines built to keep the world in tune with the heavens, the techniques that made them remain elusive. Some researchers suggest the use of sonic vibration, sound waves that loosened the lattice of rock. Others imagine water and sand used as abrasive slurry, cutting through granite with patience measured in generations. The truth may be simpler and more astonishing. Centuries of inherited craftsmanship, each generation perfecting a method it did not fully comprehend. Skill passed down as ritual becomes indistinguishable from magic. Even the stones themselves seem to remember. Seismic tests show that many megaliths resonate at specific frequencies when struck. Perhaps that was accidental, or perhaps the builders chose materials that sang in harmony with the earth's own vibration. The ancients would have heard those tones echo through the chambers they carved. To them, resonance was revelation, the sound of matter acknowledging spirit. By the time iron and writing spread across the world, this megalithic tradition was already fading. The new builders preferred brick, concrete, impermanent materials shaped by speed rather than endurance. The age of stone gave way to the age of record, and with it vanished the secrets of weight, balance, and proportion that had once united sky and earth. Yet the monuments remain unmoved, waiting. Even in ruin, they defy explanation, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of wind, yet untouched in essence. They remind us that before equations and engines, there was geometry felt in the body, a harmony sensed, not calculated. When we stand before those walls, the same question returns, the same unease that shadows every discussion of ancient ingenuity. How did they do it? And deeper still, what compelled them to try? Perhaps they sought what we still seek, to outlast time, to leave behind a proof that thought itself can be made solid. In that, they succeeded. Their towers have fallen, their languages are dust, but the stones remain, heavy with intention, perfectly aligned to the sun that still rises through their gates. As the first stars rose above the plains of Mesopotamia, humanity was no longer content to build with stone alone. Something new glimmered in the fire, a color that had not existed before, melted from ore shaped by human will. It shone with the promise of permanence. Metal was no longer a mystery of the gods. It was a tool of the mind. From that moment, the earth itself could be reforged. In the valleys between the Tigris and Euphrates, where river and desert met, the first engineers built cities on clay foundations. They were the Sumerians, and to them, invention was devotion. They dug canals that turned dust into grain, lifted water with complex shadufs, and mapped the heavens above as carefully as they measured their fields below. To understand their world, they believed, was to imitate their gods, and in doing so, to draw closer to them. They called their patrons the Anuna, the great ones of heaven and earth. Among them stood Enki, lord of the deep waters, the bringer of wisdom and craft. In their stories, Enki shaped humanity from clay, teaching them irrigation, architecture, and writing, gifts of civilization that transformed survival into order. Myths may veil history, but within the myth lies a truth. The Sumerians treated knowledge itself as divine. Every innovation, every bridge, kiln, and measure was a sacred act. Their cities rose in brick and bitumen, each crowned with a ziggurat that reached toward the stars. The ziggurat of Ur, built nearly 4,000 years ago, was more than a monument. It was an observatory, a stairway between worlds. The priests who climbed its steps carried tablets inscribed with star charts, recording planetary motions in cycles that remain accurate today. To them, the sky was not chaos but clockwork, a realm of repeating patterns that could be read and predicted. Their calculations gave birth to the sexagesimal system, counting in 60s. That rhythm survives in our minutes and hours, in the circle divided into 360 degrees. Time itself still keeps Sumerian measure. Built without iron, yet the architecture endured millennia. Bricks baked in kilns, canals lined with gypsum, arches that held their shape without cement. Each a lesson in material science disguised as ritual. When rain threatened to erode their temples, they developed drainage systems beneath the courtyards. When floods came, they elevated entire cities on artificial mounds. At Uruk, at Eridu, at Lagash, urban planning was already an art. Streets followed deliberate axes. Courtyards were aligned to maximize light and airflow. Civilization, as we know it, began with their geometry. From the same clay that built their walls, they drew another miracle: writing. Cuneiform, wedge marks pressed into wet tablets, was first used to track grain and silver. But soon the lists became stories, laws, hymns. The world learned to remember itself. Through those signs, the voice of the ancient world still speaks. Among the oldest texts are fragments of equations, tables of reciprocals, records of loans, and astronomical tables predicting eclipses. The line between priest and mathematician did not exist. Both served the same purpose: to interpret divine order through numbers. In the hands of the Sumerians, arithmetic became sacred language. Metal deepened that devotion. The blacksmith and the priest were kin. In the glow of the furnace, copper flowed like blood. Bronze, that alloy of strength and endurance, became the flesh of their gods. Weapons, tools, and ornaments alike were cast in its light. The word for metal, anaku, carried echoes of purity, of transformation through fire. To melt ore was to reenact creation itself, chaos made into form. Every forge was a ritual chamber. Bellows fed the flames like lungs. Molten streams poured into clay molds shaped like human limbs, animal bodies, celestial symbols. In each casting, they saw rebirth. The artisans of Ur called themselves servants of the sacred heat, keepers of Enki's gift. Their skill elevated them beyond mere craftsmen. They were mediators between worlds, transforming earth into power. Beneath the surface of these myths lies a sophisticated understanding of chemistry. Sumerian metallurgists smelted copper with arsenic and tin, regulating temperature through alternating layers of charcoal and ore. They mined lapis lazuli from far to the east, traded silver from Anatolia, and imported diorite, a stone hard enough to challenge modern saws. In their workshops, metal and mineral converged, creating alloys whose sheen has not faded in 5,000 years. Their vision extended beyond the forge. The Sumerians were among the first to chart the night sky in 3 dimensions, marking the paths of planets with mathematical consistency. The Mulapin tablets, written centuries after their beginning, preserve a body of knowledge so advanced that later Babylonian astronomers merely inherited it. The 12 signs of the zodiac, the division of the ecliptic, the concept of celestial latitude, all were born in Sumer. They saw the heavens not as gods in disguise, but as instruments of rhythm and recurrence. Even law bore the imprint of this order. The Code of Ur-Nammu, older than Hammurabi's, listed penalties and procedures like the steps of a geometric proof. Justice was no longer the whim of kings. It was calculation. In that calculus of fairness, society found its balance. And yet, like every age that followed, Sumer was both blessed and burdened by its brilliance. The mastery that had tamed rivers also exhausted them. Centuries of irrigation left behind salt, poisoning the fields that once fed empires. The canals that carried life also carried decay. As the soil turned white, the cities turned inward, their temples rising higher while their harvests failed. By the time foreign conquerors came from the north, Sumer was already hollowing from within, its gods silent, its fires cooling. But nothing they created truly vanished. Their mathematics became Babylon's, their myths Egypt's, their vision the foundation of all that followed. Even their stories of divine teachers descending from the heavens, the Anuna, echo in later religions as angels, watchers, or architects of destiny. Whether gods or metaphors, they represent the same revelation, that intelligence can be both gift and warning. If the builders of Sumer were the first to master earth and metal, they were also the first to sense the price of mastery. Fire brought creation and destruction. Water gave life and ruin. Between those forces, humanity learned to walk a narrow path, balancing invention with reverence. When the last Sumerian city fell, its ziggurats crumbled into dust. Yet beneath the ruins, thousands of tablets remained sealed in clay jars, their marks sharp as the day they were pressed. In those lines lies the origin of our world, the blueprint of civilization itself. Every clock that measures our hours, every law that binds a city, every equation that orders our cosmos, carries the quiet echo of that first dawn when gods and craftsmen shared the same fire. On the banks of the Nile, where time itself seems to pause, a new kind of civilization took shape, one that sought not only to survive, but to last forever. The Egyptians did not merely build for kings, they built for eternity. Every stone they lifted, every number they inscribed, every chamber aligned with the stars, carried a single purpose: to make permanence visible. In the deserts west of Memphis, that vision became stone. The pyramids still rise from the sand like frozen equations, geometry made sacred. To call them tombs is to miss their deeper intent. They are machines of order, built with a precision that confounds explanation. The Great Pyramid's base is aligned within fractions of a degree to true north. Its dimensions mirror the curvature of the Earth. Its internal shafts point directly to specific stars. Within those proportions lies a dialogue between heaven and earth. The builders called it Mayat, the balance that holds the universe together. They did not separate science from religion, nor engineering from ritual. To measure was to pray. To align was to participate in creation. Each surveyor, with his plumb line and shadow stick, was a priest of geometry, restoring the order that the gods had once set in motion. Through their instruments of copper and cord, they captured celestial rhythms with astonishing accuracy. The Nile's flooding, the solstice, the heliacal rising of Sirius, all became part of a cosmic calendar that governed life and death alike. Inside the pyramids, the stone sings. The air shafts of the Great Pyramid are not random. They resonate at frequencies that amplify sound and vibration. Some researchers believe they were designed to carry the chants of the priests deep into the core, merging voice and architecture into one act of worship. Others see in that resonance something closer to technology, chambers tuned like instruments, channels of energy as much as air. The truth may be both. To the Egyptians, sound was creation itself. The god Ptah spoke the world into being. Perhaps the pyramid was a continuation of that belief, a monument built not just to preserve, but to speak eternity. Their science extended far beyond the desert. In temples along the Nile, at Edfu, Dendera, Abydos, inscriptions record knowledge that seems anachronistic. Reliefs depict the movement of the stars, the flow of water through devices that resemble siphons and pumps, and figures holding objects shaped uncannily, like electrical bulbs or arc lamps. Whether symbolic or literal, these carvings reveal a mind that saw nature as a system of correspondences, where light, water, and sound were parts of a single cosmic equation. Medicine, too, was a sacred craft. The Ebers Papyrus, written more than 3,000 years ago, lists hundreds of remedies, surgical techniques, and observations of anatomy. Egyptian physicians performed trepanation, stitched wounds with linen thread, and sterilized tools with fire and wine. They described the pulse as the heartbeat of the body's channels, a concept that anticipates later understandings of circulation. To them, healing was not only physical, but mathematical, a restoration of balance between the forces of life. The precision of their mathematics remains astonishing. They calculated areas of circles, volumes of pyramids, and ratios so exact they would not be improved upon for centuries. Their number system, written in symbols of reeds, coils, and lotus buds, seems simple at first glance, but its architecture reveals a mind fluent in proportion. Builders who could measure the earth with rope alone had mastered geometry by intuition long before Euclid wrote his proofs, and they encoded that knowledge in stone. The Temple of Karnak, dedicated to Amun-Ra, expands along a single axis over centuries of construction, yet every addition fits perfectly within the astronomical orientation of the first. Sunlight passes through its gates on the same day each year, illuminating the sanctuary at dawn during the solstice. This is not coincidence. It is choreography. The temple is a calendar made of shadow and light. Even their art obeyed these laws. The rigid symmetry of their statues, the golden ratios in their reliefs, the measured stride of their hieroglyphs, all were governed by a canon of proportion. The human body, to them, was a reflection of the cosmos, its limbs aligned to the same geometry as the stars. When they sculpted the face of a pharaoh, they were not creating a portrait. They were restoring order, giving flesh to eternal balance. At the heart of their civilization stood a single conviction: that eternity could be engineered. Death, to them, was not an ending, but a process of transformation. The Book of the Dead describes it as a journey through chambers of trial, each guarded by symbols of time and measure. The pyramid, the tomb, the sarcophagus, all were tools for that passage, designed with the same care as a clockmaker's gears. In this, Egypt was not only a kingdom of gods, but of engineers of the soul. Beneath this perfection lies mystery. How did they quarry and transport stones weighing hundreds of tons across miles of desert without iron tools or wheels? How did they raise them with such accuracy that even earthquakes have left the structures intact? Theories abound: ramps, levers, counterweights, water buoyancy. Each explains part, none the whole. The silence of the ancient builders is its own design, as if they intended us to remember the form but forget the method. What remains is the impression of intention. A civilization that believed knowledge itself was sacred. Their temples were libraries in stone, every wall a page, every symbol a formula. The priests of Heliopolis studied the stars for patterns that could predict not only the flooding of the Nile, but the fate of kings. Astronomy, medicine, and theology formed one continuum, bound by the same laws of harmony. To modernize, Egypt seems frozen, a monument to the past. But in truth, it was a laboratory of the future. Its codes still govern the foundations of art and science. The calendar we follow, the hour we measure, the very notion of architectural proportion. All descend from those who once mapped eternity along the Nile. As night falls over the plateau of Giza, the pyramids remain lit by starlight that began its journey before recorded time. The same constellations that guided their builders still pass above, unchanged. Perhaps that is the final lesson of the Egyptian code, that nothing is truly lost, only transcribed into another form. Stone remembers what paper forgets. Light carries what words cannot. And so, while their language has faded and their gods have gone quiet, the architecture of eternity still stands, whispering through geometry what no empire could ever silence. The deserts of Egypt were already ancient. Another world stirred to life along a different river. It did not shout its presence with pyramids or empire. It whispered it in symmetry, in brick, in the quiet order of streets that ran straight as thought. For centuries, it lay forgotten beneath silt and sand until the 20th century unearthed its bones. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and the civilization that flowed between them, the Indus. To walk its excavated streets today is to feel an intelligence that preferred function to spectacle. The cities were not monuments to kings, but designs for communities. Houses faced narrow lanes, each with its own well, its own bathing room, its own drain, leading into a covered sewer that ran beneath the street. No other ancient civilization built sanitation on that scale. It was not the grandeur of conquest, but the geometry of cleanliness. An understanding that water itself was sacred only when controlled. Their bricks were all the same size, 1 by 2 by 4, a proportion repeated across hundreds of settlements. This was not random convenience. It was standardization, planned and enforced across an area larger than Mesopotamia and Egypt combined. The Indus people spoke through precision rather than proclamation. They left no monuments of rulers, no statues of divine conquerors, only evidence of systems that worked. And yet, their silence is the loudest enigma in history. Thousands of seals, carved with animals and symbols, bear a script still undeciphered. Tiny inscriptions of 5 or 6 characters, too brief to read, too consistent to dismiss. The language remains locked, its meaning lost like a key dropped in a deep well. Some believe it encoded trade, others ritual. Some see in it a proto-alphabet, others a language of images. But whatever it said, it linked a civilization that stretched from the Arabian Sea to the foothills of the Himalayas. A network of trade, faith, and craft bound by symbols no one alive can understand. Beneath the dust, their metalwork gleams. The Indus artisans cast bronze so fine it rivaled the masterpieces of later ages. Small statues of dancers, animals, and carts capture motion in a single line, confidence born of long practice. They smelted copper and tin with scientific control, crafted jewelry from gold and carnelian, and used faience, a glazed ceramic, with hues that catch the light even now. Their city planning reveals more than beauty. It reveals engineering. Streets ran along cardinal directions, buildings followed grid systems, and drains sloped with exact gradients to ensure flow. The Indus did not guess, they calculated. In Mohenjo-Daro, the so-called Great Bath remains the heart of mystery. Set within a courtyard of baked brick, it was lined with bitumen to make it watertight. Steps descend from both ends. A small hole drains the pool into the sewers below. It could have been for ritual purification, civic gathering, or something older. An experiment in hydraulic control. Whatever its purpose, it testifies to a civilization that saw water not just as resource, but as principle. To harness water was to shape life itself. And still, there are marks of something stranger. Some bricks show signs of vitrification, surfaces melted as if by sudden, intense heat. At several sites, skeletons lie as if death had come in an instant, without battle or warning. Archaeologists speak of fire, flood, disease. Others whisper of a disaster no one can name. The Vedic hymns that later emerged from the same region speak of brilliant flashes, thunderous weapons, and cities that shone like suns. Metaphors, perhaps, for storm or cosmic war. But such images, echoing across ages, suggest memory of a trauma too vast to forget. The Indus world also reached the sea. At Lothal, on India's western coast, lies a basin long believed to be a dockyard, a rectangle of brick with sluice gates that opened into a now-vanished river. If true, it would make Lothal the oldest known port in history, linking inland cities to trade routes that stretched to Mesopotamia. Clay tablets found in Sumer mention merchants from Meluha, a distant land of precious woods, carnelian and copper, almost certainly the Indus. Ships sailed between the two civilizations, exchanging goods and ideas across thousands of miles. The Indus people were not isolated, they were connected, the silent engineers of an ancient globalization. Their faith, too, was one of continuity. Terracotta figurines show goddesses with vegetal crowns, animals revered as divine, horned deities seated in meditative poses. From those images would later grow the pantheon of Hinduism. Shiva's posture in the Lord of Beasts, the sacred bull Nandi, the fertility of the Earth Mother. The Indus religion was neither idol worship nor abstraction. It was balance between male and female, between human and nature, between fire and water. The tools they left behind suggest knowledge that reached beyond simple utility. Beads were drilled with holes finer than a hair, shaped by tools of diamond-tipped precision. Some weights, made of chert, follow binary progression: 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, a numerical logic far ahead of its time. The more we study their artifacts, the more deliberate they become. This was not a primitive world awaiting enlightenment. It was a society that had already solved many of the problems later civilizations would rediscover. Even so, within a few centuries, it was gone. Around 1900 BC, the rivers began to change. The Saraswati, once mighty, dried or shifted course. Climate patterns altered. Floods turned to drought. Trade routes collapsed, and the cities slowly emptied. There was no conquest, no dramatic fall, only withdrawal. Houses were abandoned, streets filled with dust, drains choked with silt. The people moved eastward toward the Ganges, leaving behind the order they had built. The script fell silent, the forges cooled, and the memory of the Indus vanished into myth. Centuries later, the Vedic age would rise on the same soil. Hymns would speak of rivers that once flowed where deserts now lie, of cities of light swallowed by sand. The language had changed, but the undertone remained, a yearning for lost harmony, for the age when gods and engineers were one. Some say the Indus knowledge survived in disguise, passed down through ritual rather than writing. The geometry of fire altars, the ratios of Vedic meters, the architecture of early temples, all seem to echo Indus precision. The line between myth and engineering blurs once again. Even now, the Indus keeps its secrets well. The river that nourished it has shifted. The tablets that might reveal its voice remain unread, and the logic that guided its cities waits beneath layers of time. Yet the evidence speaks through structure. A civilization that understood the physics of water, the mathematics of balance, the ethics of sanitation, and built not for kings, but for people. Where Egypt sought eternity in monuments, the Indus found it in design. Where Mesopotamia worshipped the gods of storm and flame, the Indus honored the quiet rhythm of daily life. Its legacy is not conquest, but continuity, an architecture of humility that still murmurs beneath the dust. Perhaps that is why it feels so modern. In its wells and drains, we glimpse our own reflection, a reminder that progress is not always measured by size or conquest, but by the calm mastery of the elements that sustain us. Beneath the calm blue of the Aegean lies the ghost of a vanished brilliance. Between the coasts of Crete and the shattered rim of Santorini, archaeologists uncovered traces of a people who mastered beauty as if it were a science. They left no sprawling empires, no boastful inscriptions, no chronicles of conquest, only elegance carved into clay and fresco. Their language remains mostly unreadable, their gods unnamed. Yet their cities whisper of a civilization that understood motion, color, and water with a precision that feels almost modern. The Minoans did not build to dominate, they built to live. At Knossos, Phaistos, and Zakros, palaces unfolded like labyrinths, open courtyards, staircases without end, light wells descending deep into the earth. Walls were painted with dolphins, lilies, and dancers leaping over bulls. No fortress walls, no armies engraved in triumph. Theirs was a world balanced between ritual and rhythm, where architecture flowed like the sea that sustained it. Running water coursed through terracotta pipes, flushing drains and fountains. Clay ducts carried cool air through upper halls, creating a natural climate system long before the word existed. Floors were paved with gypsum, so polished they mirrored light like glass. At Knossos, the queen's megaron held a private bath, tiled and painted with spirals of blue, a design that looked forward thousands of years to plumbing and Art Nouveau at once. Civilization in Crete became choreography. Their power came not from armies, but from harbors. Minoan ships reached Egypt, the Levant, and the Greek mainland, trading bronze, olive oil, and the vivid dyes that colored their frescoes. In return came gold, ivory, and ideas. From these exchanges grew a culture that could blend technical mastery with aesthetic grace, a union rare in any age. They charted the stars for navigation, measured the seasons for trade winds, and built their cities on a compass of both beauty and practicality. But the sea that fed them was a restless teacher. In the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, a mountain on the island of Thera, today called Santorini, began to tremble. The volcano erupted with a force rivaling Krakatoa, tearing the island apart. Ash fell over Crete, blotting out the sun for days. A tsunami swept across the harbors where their fleets had once stood proud. Some cities were rebuilt, others abandoned. Within a generation, Minoan dominance faded into silence. For centuries, the story of Thera lay hidden beneath pumice and legend, until modern excavations revealed the city of Akrotiri, streets preserved beneath volcanic ash, walls still painted with crimson and cobalt. There were 3-story houses with balconies and plumbing, workshops filled with pottery mid-creation, frescoes showing fleets of ships sailing between islands alive with festivals. It was not a ruin of savages, but a freeze frame of sophistication. Time itself seemed to have stopped at noon. Thera's eruption may have been the world's first global catastrophe, the origin of the Atlantis legend, the echo of a civilization drowned by its own element. But destruction was only half the story. Out of its ashes rose another culture that would inherit and transform its legacy, the Mycenaeans of the Greek mainland. Where the Minoans built for grace, the Mycenaeans built for endurance. Their fortresses crowned the hills at Mycenae, Tyrins and Pylos, citadels of massive limestone blocks fitted together so tightly they seemed the work of giants. The Greeks who came later called those builders Cyclopes, for only such beings could have lifted the stones. Their gates, especially the Lion Gate of Mycenae, blend architecture with symbolism, twin beasts standing over the entrance like guardians of power. If the Minoans were engineers of peace, the Mycenaeans were architects of control. They borrowed Cretan artistry and fused it with a warrior's purpose. Palaces became administrative centers, their storerooms lined with massive jars of oil, grain, and wine. Linear B tablets, one of the first deciphered Greek scripts, record inventories and taxes, the machinery of a bureaucratic state. Yet even amid this pragmatism, art persisted. Gold masks, inlaid daggers, frescoes of chariots and dancers. The balance between order and opulence, once natural to Crete, became ambition in Mycenae. Across the Aegean, the two worlds met, one fading, one rising. Trade continued, but the tone changed. Where Minoan ships once carried gifts, Mycenaean fleets carried command. Eventually, the island palaces were absorbed or destroyed. The Mycenaeans inherited not only their trade routes, but their myths, reshaping them into legends of heroes and wars. Minos became the tyrant of the labyrinth, and the bull-leaping ritual turned into the monster of the Minotaur. History dissolved into storytelling, as it always does when memory meets power. Still, the influence of the vanished Minoans persisted in the arts of balance. The Greeks who followed kept their love of proportion, their sense that beauty was a kind of truth. Even in the cold citadels of Mycenae, echoes of Cretan harmony remained. Frescoes of flowing lines, a reverence for the sea, an understanding that architecture could reflect the rhythm of life. At their height, both civilizations mastered the materials of their age. Bronze was the lifeblood of their economy, a blend of copper and tin that required networks stretching from Cyprus to the Black Sea. Smiths forged blades that gleamed with ritual perfection, vessels hammered thin as leaves, hinges that turned as smoothly as modern joints. To make bronze demanded both chemistry and geography, and the coordination of entire societies. Every ingot carried the weight of collaboration. Then the pattern shifted again. Around 1200 BC, the Aegean world convulsed. Palaces burned, fortresses fell, trade collapsed. The cause remains uncertain. Drought, invasion, earthquakes, rebellion, perhaps all at once. The great circuits of exchange that had connected Crete, Mycenae, and Egypt broke apart. For centuries, darkness returned to the Mediterranean, and writing itself disappeared. The age of bronze had ended. Still, amid the ruins, fragments survived. Gold cups buried with kings, seal stones etched with running bulls, tablets hardened by the same fires that destroyed their palaces. These relics are messages in reverse, artifacts that speak most clearly when everything else has fallen silent. What remains of the Minoans and Mycenaeans is not just architecture, but attitude. The belief that beauty and order could be engineered, that civilization could rise from rhythm as much as from power. Their world reminds us that progress is not a straight ascent, but a tide. When it recedes, it leaves behind the shimmer of what was possible. Even now, on Santorini, the light turns volcanic cliffs to bronze each evening, and the sea fills the caldera left by the eruption. The horizon glows as it did 3,000 years ago, and for a moment, it feels as if the Minoan ships might reappear. Painted sails catching firelight, moving toward a harbor that no longer exists. High above the clouds, where the air thins and sound travels like metal, people once carved civilization into stone. The Andes were not a place made for comfort, but for endurance, mountains fractured by frost and sun, valleys cut by rivers that could erase a village overnight. Yet here, at altitudes where breathing is a kind of prayer, ancient engineers built with such precision that their work still defies time and tremor alike. The story begins long before the Inca. Across the Bolivian plateau at Tiwanaku, immense stones lie scattered like the remnants of a dismantled cosmos. The temple walls, the gate of the sun, the monolithic statues, all carved with an accuracy that seems to anticipate machinery. Grooves, interlocks, and beveled edges suggest more than brute strength. They reveal measurement. Each cut seems deliberate, as if the builders followed a geometry both functional and spiritual. The blocks are not only joined, they are tuned, their weights balanced so precisely that they hum when struck. No one knows who first conceived the city or how they raised its megaliths. The local Aymara traditions say the gods built Tiwanaku before the world's second sunrise, when stars still walked the earth. Archaeologists trace its age to at least the first millennium BC, but the site feels older, a memory of a civilization that measured with light instead of tools. The gateway's carvings mark solstices and equinoxes, and when the sun aligns with its central figure, the shadows fall exactly where they did 1,000 years ago. Time itself, it seems, was part of the architecture. Further south, along the plains near Lake Titicaca, stands Puma Punku, a site so precise it borders on surreal. Gigantic H-shaped blocks fit together like pieces from an unassembled machine, their edges sharp as glass. Each cut follows right angles finer than modern steel saws could easily achieve. Some stones show intricate slots and depressions that appear designed to interlock, yet no one has found the pattern they were meant to form. Whether ceremonial center, observatory, or something entirely unknown, Puma Punku remains a question carved in basalt. Far to the north, a different genius took shape. The Nazca people etched their world directly into the desert floor, vast lines and figures visible only from the sky. Monkeys, hummingbirds, and spirals stretch for miles, their geometry so precise that the lines barely deviate over uneven terrain. The drawings align with solstice points and water sources, suggesting both calendar and map. They may have been offerings to the gods of rain, or messages meant for the heavens themselves. To this day, the method of their creation, maintaining symmetry across such scale without an aerial view, remains an engineering riddle as elegant as it is enduring. While the lowlands mastered sand and symbol, the highlands mastered stone. The Inca, inheritors of forgotten builders, took that mastery to its pinnacle. They transformed mountain slopes into architecture, turning nature itself into structure. At Machu Picchu, terraces cascade down the ridge like steps of a giant staircase, preventing erosion while feeding the city above. Each level manages water and soil with the precision of a laboratory. Runoff channels hidden beneath the surface, irrigation channels guiding every drop. It is beauty in service of survival. Their walls, built of granite and andesite, fit together without mortar, blocks of irregular shape that lock as tightly as gears. During earthquakes, they move and settle without collapse. Modern architects still study them as examples of flexible design centuries ahead of their time. These were not trial and error masons. They were mathematicians of matter, reading the mountain's stress lines as one might read a map. Transportation in that terrain demanded invention of another kind. The Inca road system, stretching over 25,000 miles, connected sea-level deserts to glacial peaks. Stone-paved highways, suspension bridges woven from grass fibers, and relay stations for runners made it one of the most efficient networks in the ancient world. Messages crossed the empire faster than they would in medieval Europe. Each bridge was rebuilt annually, a ritual of renewal that bound engineering and faith together. Their communication was not limited to roads. The Inca used quipu, cords knotted in intricate patterns, to record information, accounting, census, perhaps even narrative. Each knot, color, and spacing encoded data in a language of texture. For centuries, it was dismissed as a primitive tally system, but modern analysis suggests complexity approaching binary notation. The empire's bureaucracy ran on these strings, its logic as mathematical as any written script. Science and ritual were inseparable. Temples like Coricancha in Cusco glimmered with sheets of gold, symbol of the sun's radiance, but their alignment served astronomical precision. Through specific windows, beams of sunlight entered only on certain days of the year, marking the solstice and the agricultural calendar. Observatories such as Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun, were carved from bedrock to capture the moment when shadow vanished at noon. In those moments, the divine and the measurable became one. Metal added another layer of mastery. The Andes are rich in ore, and its people knew how to work it. Gold was revered not for wealth, but for meaning. The sweat of the sun, pure and incorruptible. Silver was the tears of the moon. Copper and bronze formed tools and ceremonial blades. Some artifacts show alloys so precisely mixed that modern metallurgists still struggle to replicate them without advanced furnaces. The technology served not conquest, but balance, a harmony between human craft and natural element. It is tempting to imagine that such sophistication belonged to the Inca alone, but each innovation echoes earlier civilizations, Chavin, Moche, Wari, layers of knowledge accumulating through centuries. Every generation inherited fragments from the one before, as if some ancient blueprint persisted across time. The Andes themselves became an archive, their stones inscribed not with words, but with precision. In their construction, we see an obsession with equilibrium. Stairways mirror the slope of the terrain. Windows frame peaks as if measuring their angles. Even the city's orientation corresponds to constellations. Cusco, laid out in the shape of a puma, capital of both empire and cosmos. The Andes, once hostile, had been transformed into a living instrument tuned to sun, moon, and water. The Spaniards who arrived in the 16th century could scarcely comprehend what they found. They melted the gold, but left the stones, too perfect to dismantle. Beneath their churches, Inca walls still stand, unmoved by time or earthquake. The conquerors wrote of demons who had aided the builders, unable to imagine that human hands could achieve such control of matter. Yet what endured was not magic, but method, a science of stone born of patience, precision, and respect for the natural world. Even today, the Andes keep their engineers' secrets close. Terraces still yield crops after 1,000 years. Aqueducts still carry water to villages perched above clouds. The technology was never lost, only quieted, waiting to be noticed. Civilizations in the mountains lived by the same law that governs the peaks themselves: balance or collapse. Their genius was not in defying the earth, but in learning its rhythm, a lesson as relevant now as when their walls first caught the morning sun. Across the mountains of Asia, where invention became tradition, civilization turned its curiosity inward, not to conquer the world, but to understand its pattern. No empire lasted longer or preserved more of its own genius than China, whose craftsmen and thinkers built not only machines, but philosophies that explained why machines should work. Their art was precision, their science harmony. From the earliest dynasties, invention was inseparable from belief. The elements, wood, fire, earth, metal, water, were not raw materials, but principles that governed both cosmos and craft. To master them was to align with the flow of qi, the living breath of the world. In that conviction lay a unity that the West would not rediscover for centuries. Science and spirituality as two sides of the same design. In the Bronze Age kingdoms of the Shang and Zhou, metal became a language of power. Ritual vessels cast in ornate molds display both technical mastery and philosophical intent. Their patterns mirror constellations. Their inscriptions preserve the earliest Chinese characters. To create bronze at that scale required control of heat, proportion, and timing. A choreography of molten fire directed by human precision. Every cauldron, every bell was both an offering and an equation. Over time, those equations multiplied. Farmers invented the iron plow and the collar harness that revolutionized agriculture. Engineers learned to canalize rivers, carving waterways that linked provinces across thousands of miles. The Grand Canal, still flowing today, was not only an artery of commerce, but a triumph of coordination. Locks, aqueducts, and dredging systems calculated to balance flow between north and south. Each century added refinement without forgetting its foundations. In that environment of constant reinvention, knowledge became cumulative rather than cyclical. Paper appeared during the Han Dynasty, transforming administration, art, and memory. For the first time, information could travel farther than a dynasty's lifetime. Ink and brush turned bureaucracy into literature. Calligraphy itself became a science of gesture, the rhythm of thought recorded in movement. Not long after came the compass, the seismograph, and the wheelbarrow, devices that show a civilization already centuries ahead of its contemporaries in practical understanding. Exploration was never random. It followed philosophy. The Chinese approach to invention was holistic, guided by the concept of balance, yin and yang, void and form. The physician studied both pulse and planet. The astronomer read weather and ethics in the same sky. Every tool reflected that duality. The magnetic compass was used not only to navigate seas, but to orient temples and graves toward auspicious directions, uniting geography and spirituality. What began as divination evolved into navigation, a subtle shift from belief to application that defines the Chinese genius. Printing arrived next, a quiet revolution that multiplied knowledge instead of hoarding it. The Tang and Song dynasties refined woodblock printing until it became as natural as writing. Then came movable type, crafted by Bai Sheng from clay. An idea so efficient that it anticipated Gutenberg by centuries. Books multiplied, literacy spread, and scholarship became a public pursuit. In this diffusion of knowledge, China achieved what other civilizations only imagined: a culture that could preserve its memory while constantly reinterpreting it. Their artisans were scientists without title. They experimented with lacquer, ceramics, and alloys, until art and chemistry were indistinguishable. The creation of porcelain, that translucent fusion of earth and flame, remains one of history's purest marriages of beauty and material science. In every kiln, temperature, glaze, and mineral content were measured with the same rigor as an alchemist's formula. The result was not decoration, but perfection, matter made to reflect the order of the heavens. Perhaps no discovery shaped the world more than gunpowder. Its first recipes appear in texts meant for alchemists, seekers of immortality who mix sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter in search of eternal life, and instead found controlled explosion. What began as spiritual experiment became technological catalyst. The Song armies harnessed it for flamethrowers and rockets, while scholars recorded its properties with analytical clarity. Fire, once sacred, had been quantified. Humanity had learned to measure destruction. Alongside this experimentation grew an equally rigorous ethics. The thinkers of the Confucian and Taoist schools asked not only how the world worked, but why knowledge should serve. Confucius taught that mastery meant responsibility, that invention was empty without virtue. Laozi answered with paradox, that to rule nature, one must yield to it. Out of their tension emerged a culture where technology evolved within restraint. The Chinese did not seek to dominate nature, but to coexist with it. Their inventions made life more efficient, not more defiant. Astronomy remained the purest expression of that balance. Imperial observatories charted the skies with instruments of bronze and jade. The armillary sphere, invented in the 2nd century BC, modeled celestial motion with astonishing precision. By the Ming dynasty, star charts contained tens of thousands of entries, some predicting eclipses centuries ahead. To map the heavens was both science and moral duty. An emperor who lost the rhythm of the stars risked losing the mandate of heaven itself. Even warfare, though transformed by invention, followed philosophy. The strategist Sun Tzu wrote that the highest victory was the one achieved without battle, an understanding as analytical as it was humane. Engineering served that same principle. The Great Wall, stretching across mountains and deserts, was less a fortress than a system. Watchtowers, beacons, and roads unified into one responsive organism. Its builders used earth, brick, and ingenuity, adapting to terrain rather than imposing on it. In its pattern, one sees the larger pattern of China's thought. Endurance through harmony. Medicine advanced under the same principles of observation and balance. Physicians mapped the body as a landscape of rivers and winds, their tools fine needles and herbs. Acupuncture, moxibustion, and herbal pharmacology emerged from centuries of empirical trial, refined by the belief that health was a form of alignment between body and cosmos. These practices, recorded in the Huangdi Neijing, remain among the world's oldest continuous sciences. Through every dynasty, artisans worked beside philosophers, scientists beside poets. The same hand that forged steel for a plow might carve jade for an emperor. Innovation was collective, cumulative, never severed from its roots. And because China revered its past, its future endured. While other civilizations burned their libraries, China copied and recopied. It made memory renewable. To study its inventions is to glimpse continuity itself. From the brushstroke to the bridge, from the compass needle to the firing kiln, every creation reflected a belief in pattern, a conviction that nature and thought are mirrors. Perhaps that is why China never truly lost its knowledge. Dynasties fell, wars came and went, but the designs remained, carried forward by scholars, monks, and artisans who saw no difference between beauty and truth. In their hands, invention became something more than progress. It became heritage, a living current flowing from one mind to another across thousands of years. Long after empires elsewhere turned to ruin, the Chinese workshop still echoed with the sound of tools and the murmur of philosophy, a reminder that the greatest technology of all is continuity itself. Long before iron rang in Europe, Its music was already echoing across Africa. In the savannas of Nubia, in the forests of Nigeria, in the hills of Tanzania, fire had become knowledge. A secret passed from oar to hand, from forge to spirit. The blacksmith's hammer was not merely a tool, but a ritual instrument, striking rhythm into the bones of civilization. Every spark was an act of remembrance. Every blade was a prayer. Africa's story begins not in monuments of stone, but in the hidden glow of furnaces. At Meroe, capital of the ancient Kushite kingdom, slag heaps rise like black pyramids, remnants of an industry that flourished while the Greco-Roman world was still in awe of bronze. Thousands of furnaces once burned there, smelting iron with precision unmatched for its time. Archaeologists call it the Birmingham of antiquity. The locals knew it as the City of Fire. The metalworkers of Meroe mastered bloomery furnaces that reached extraordinary temperatures, extracting pure iron with the skill of chemists. Their art was born of geography and faith. The Nile's southern reaches provided both ore and fuel, and the people who worked them saw metal as a living thing. In their myths, iron was not discovered but revealed, drawn from the earth by divine permission. The blacksmith was therefore more than craftsman. He was mediator, transforming raw stone into order. To strike metal was to tame chaos. The forge became altar, the hammer a voice between worlds. Far to the west, along the banks of the Niger, other furnaces blazed. At Nok, one of Africa's earliest known cultures, artisans shaped terracotta figures with expressions so human they seem caught mid-breath. These sculptures predate classical Greece by centuries and suggest a people already fluent in both art and metallurgy. Their iron tools, excavated nearby, mark a revolution born in silence. No empire, no chroniclers, just the steady rhythm of smelting and sewing, the hum of progress hidden beneath the trees. Iron changed everything. It cut through forest, turned soil, and bound communities through trade. Unlike bronze, which required distant tin, iron came from the local earth. Mastery of it meant independence. Across the continent, blacksmiths became both revered and feared. They knew how to create weapons, plowshares, and charms. In villages from Mali to Mozambique, they were seen as half human, half spirit, men who could command both fire and fate. Among the Dogon of the Bandiagara cliffs, forging was reenactment of creation itself. According to their cosmology, the god Nomo had descended to earth in a whirlwind of flame, bringing with him the first knowledge of iron. Each time a smith lit his furnace, he repeated that descent in miniature. The Dogon even described the planets and stars with uncanny accuracy, long before telescopes, evidence, perhaps, of a worldview where science and myth shared a single pulse. Centuries earlier, in the Sahara's shifting sands, stone circles and megaliths had already measured the heavens. At Nabta Playa, predating Stonehenge by a millennium, alignments of rock mark solstices and the rising of Sirius, the same star that guided the Egyptians. The people who placed them were cattle herders, ancestors of future kingdoms. Their monuments prove that observation, calculation, and architecture had deep roots in Africa's prehistory, reaching beyond any written timeline. When Egypt's dynasties waned, the torch passed south and west. The kingdom of Kush, straddling trade between Africa and the Mediterranean, forged its own empire of iron. Its rulers built pyramids smaller but steeper than those of Giza, reflecting a distinctive aesthetic, swift, concentrated, vertical. Their smiths supplied weapons and tools across the continent. From there, the knowledge of smelting spread into the heartlands, adapting to every landscape it met. At Great Zimbabwe, the stones themselves became testimony. Without mortar, walls rose in sweeping curves, fitted with the same seamless precision once seen in Andean citadels. The enclosure's massive conical tower may have served as granary, temple, or symbol of unity. Whatever its function, its engineering was impeccable. Excavations reveal evidence of iron smelting nearby, furnaces, tuyères, slag, confirming that metallurgy underpinned its power. Gold, too, glittered in the riverbeds, fueling trade networks that reached the Indian Ocean. Ships from Arabia and India anchored at Sofala, exchanging silks and spices for the gold of the highlands. Africa was not isolated, it was central. Metallurgy traveled with faith and migration. The Bantu expansion, beginning more than 2,000 years ago, carried both language and technology across half a continent. Villages grew where iron met water. Kingdoms rose where craftsmanship met organization. The blacksmith became the heartbeat of progress. His skill determined whether a people could hunt, farm, defend, or build. In many traditions, he ranked beside kings and diviners, his knowledge guarded within families and guilds, his apprentices sworn to secrecy. The chemistry of African ironwork astonishes modern scientists. Furnaces in regions of Tanzania and Rwanda achieved temperatures higher than those of contemporary Europe. Some used natural drafts instead of bellows, exploiting wind and design to feed oxygen efficiently. Metallurgists studying these sites found slag of remarkable purity, evidence of intentional carbon control. These were not primitive attempts. They were refined, repeatable methods honed by generations of observation. Beyond utility, metal carried meaning. In the Yoruba kingdoms, the god Ogun reigned over iron and war, patron of all who shaped or wielded the metal. Every forge began with libation to him. The smith's hammer struck in rhythm with drumming, calling Ogun's attention and blessing. Tools, weapons, and sculptures alike were consecrated acts. Art in Africa was rarely decoration. It was conversation with power. Gold, too, took on sacred dimension. In the forests of Ghana and along the Niger Delta, the Akan and Benin peoples turned metallurgy into art unrivaled in delicacy. The bronzes of Benin, cast by the lost wax process, capture movement, hierarchy, and myth in copper alloy. Each face, each ornament, records an understanding of form and temperature equal to any Renaissance foundry. These works were archives in metal, history sculpted to endure conquest. European travelers who arrived centuries later saw only what they expected: mystery and superstition. They could not imagine that iron had first been mastered here, or that the continent's engineers had long ago mapped stars, charted floods, and measured heat. The silence of written record was mistaken for absence of reason. But Africa's record was not written in paper. It was forged, woven, sung. Its knowledge lived in rhythm, in technique, in ceremony. From the shores of Lake Victoria to the deserts of Mauritania, traces of smelters still lie buried. Charcoal, slag, fragments of tuyère. These are the libraries of Africa's forgotten blacksmiths. Their experiments refined by instinct what later chemists would calculate by formula. They discovered carburization, tempering, and alloying through patience alone. Every village furnace was a classroom. Every apprentice, a scientist in ritual's disguise. The legacy of those artisans shaped the world that followed. Without their mastery of iron, there would have been no plough to tame the savannah, no tool to carve the forests, no spear to guard the caravans that crossed the Sahara. Africa's metallurgy was not a peripheral achievement, it was a foundation, the pulse beneath global history. Though the smoke of their forges has long cleared, Their genius still glows in what endures, in the resilience of African craftsmanship, in the rhythm of its rituals, in the quiet brilliance of those who learned to turn fire into memory. Their legacy is the shimmer of heat on metal, the heartbeat of creation itself, proof that long before the world wrote its first equations, Africa had already learned how to transform Earth into eternity. For centuries, the known world was bound together by metal. From the palaces of Egypt to the citadels of Mycenae, from Hatti's mountain fortresses to the ports of Ugarit, civilization gleamed with bronze, that alloy of endurance, half copper, half tin, and entirely ambition. It was the first global industry, a network of miners, sailors, and kings linked by trade as delicate and vital as the veins of the earth itself. When that network broke, the world darkened. The Bronze Age was not an age of isolation. Across the eastern Mediterranean, ships carried ore, tools, and ideas from one empire to another. Copper flowed from Cyprus and Crete. Tin arrived from distant Afghanistan, or perhaps from the mists of Cornwall. Artisans mixed them in forges that glowed like miniature suns, producing weapons, mirrors, and statues that defined an epoch. To command bronze was to command prosperity. Each kingdom played its part in the balance. Egypt anchored the south with its grain and gold. The Hittites held the mountains and mines of Anatolia. The Minoans and later Mycenaeans ruled the sea routes. The Canaanite cities of the Levant linked them all through harbors, rich in cedar and silver. Together they formed a lattice of exchange, goods, knowledge, and diplomacy flowing along the same currents. Letters from this age, scratched into clay in cuneiform, still survive. Pharaohs addressing foreign kings as brother, requesting shipments of metal, offering brides and treaties. They reveal a world surprisingly modern in tone, bureaucratic, international, and precariously interdependent. Behind the grandeur of temples and armies lay a fragile system sustained by trust and trade. Then, near the close of the 13th century, BC, that balance began to fail. Storms broke the pattern. Drought hardened the soil. Earthquakes rippled through the Aegean. Entire harvests vanished. When famine came, alliances cracked. Records from Ugarit plead for grain shipments that never arrived. Armies marched not to conquer, but to survive. At the same time, a shadow moved across the seas. Inscriptions call them the Sea Peoples, confederations of raiders, migrants, or desperate survivors. They struck from the coasts, burning cities that had stood for centuries. Hatti fell, its archives lost to fire. Ugarit, the crossroads of empires, vanished overnight. The Mycenaean palaces collapsed in quick succession, leaving only ashes and pottery shards. The catastrophe was not a single event, but a chain reaction. When trade ceased, tin disappeared, and with it, the ability to make bronze. The very metal that defined the age became its undoing. Without it, weapons dulled, tools broke, infrastructure crumbled. The interlinked world of the late Bronze Age, once so confident in its sophistication, dissolved into silence. Across a generation or two, the light of literacy dimmed. Palaces that had kept archives in thousands of tablets stood empty. The economies that had depended on long-distance trade shrank into local barter. The great scribes, engineers, and navigators, the keepers of the system, were gone or scattered. A new world emerged from the ruins, smaller, harder, and more cautious. Archaeologists still debate what, precisely, caused the collapse. Climate, invasion, internal revolt, disease, all leave their traces. But the deeper truth may be that complexity itself became the weakness. Civilizations that had grown dependent on global networks found themselves unable to adapt when those connections failed. The Age of Bronze was a lesson written in metal. Brilliance can blind, and progress can overreach. In the aftermath, survivors rebuilt in fragments. Small chiefdoms replaced empires. Oral tradition replaced bureaucracy. The art of writing nearly disappeared from Greece for 4 centuries. In Egypt, the late pharaohs clung to old rituals as their kingdom contracted to the Nile's narrow banks. In Mesopotamia, famine and war turned cities to dust. The world that had been united by trade became a mosaic of isolation. Yet even in the ashes, innovation stirred. Necessity, as always, forced discovery. Deprived of tin, metallurgists turned to iron, a material once dismissed as brittle and unworkable. Gradually, through experiment, they learned to temper it, to control its carbon, to forge it into something stronger than bronze. From the ruins of the old order came the Iron Age, born of scarcity but destined for endurance. The metal of crisis became the metal of continuity. The collapse was not only material, it was also spiritual. The old gods, those of palace and hierarchy, lost their authority. New beliefs rose from local soil. The household spirit, the tribal protector, the god who listened to individual prayer. In the emptiness left by empire, the human voice found intimacy again. From that silence grew the seeds of later revelation. Prophets, philosophers, poets, the beginning of a different kind of civilization. Excavations across the Aegean and Near East reveal layers of destruction so consistent they read like a shared memory. Beneath the ruins lie traces of fire, arrowheads, and shattered idols. Above them, centuries of recovery, each new town built slightly higher than the last, as if humanity were stacking its past into a lesson. The dark age that followed was not entirely dark, it was gestation. By the 9th century BC, trade revived. Phoenician sailors ventured beyond familiar coasts, carrying with them the alphabet, a simplified script born from the ashes of cuneiform. With fewer symbols and easier learning, it spread quickly, democratizing literacy. The same seas that once brought destruction now carried rebirth. Looking back, the Age of Bronze seems inevitable, as if civilizations are destined to rise together and fall together, connected by their own brilliance. It was the first experiment in globalization, and the first to prove how fragile connection can be. In that sense, its end was not tragedy alone, but transformation. The world learned to rebuild smaller, to adapt, to forge resilience from ruin. The pattern remains hauntingly familiar. Prosperity, expansion, interdependence, and sudden collapse. Each era repeats the rhythm, changing its metals, its machines, but not its nature. The ruins of Ugarit and Hatti are not merely archaeology, they are prophecy. They remind us that every age believes its systems eternal, until the day the ships stop coming. Even so, something survived. The copper still glints in buried forges. Fragments of tin still sparkle in old trade routes, and in the faint lines of a broken tablet, a scribe's unfinished letter begging for help that never arrived. The voice of the Bronze Age still speaks. It tells of connection and loss, of ingenuity undone by its own success, and of the human impulse that endures beyond ruin, the need to build again. Civilization may fall, but curiosity never dies. After the storms of the Bronze Age, the survivors began to gather fragments of what had been lost. Clay tablets, star charts, fragments of songs, each became a seed of continuity. Out of the ruins of empire rose the scholars of Babylon, and later the philosophers of Greece and Alexandria. the custodians of everything the world had once known. The city of Babylon, rebuilt under Nebuchadnezzar II, was more than a capital. It was a library in brick and bitumen. Within its walls, astronomers charted the sky, with a devotion once reserved for gods. They watched the wanderers, planets moving against the backdrop of fixed stars, and saw not divine whim, but rhythm. The heavens became predictable, measurable, mathematical. Each night's observation was pressed into clay, a permanent record of time's machinery. Their accuracy astonishes even now. Babylonian astronomers predicted lunar eclipses centuries before any other culture. They tracked Venus through cycles so precise that modern science confirmed their calculations only with the help of computers. To them, numbers were not abstractions, but divine syntax, a way to read the mind of the cosmos. The same impulse that once built ziggurats now built equations. Below those same stars, other scholars began mapping the earth itself. They measured boundaries, irrigation channels, and city grids, translating observation into geometry. The very act of writing, born in the river valleys millennia before, became a means of investigation. Tablets from the great Esagila temple describe ratios, square roots, and algorithms long before Pythagoras was born. The Babylonians did not think of these as inventions. They were revelations, glimpses of order embedded in creation. When Persian kings conquered Mesopotamia, they preserved what they found. The empire of Cyrus the Great became a bridge between civilizations. Babylonian science, Egyptian engineering, and Greek philosophy, all moving along the same royal roads. Knowledge, like trade, became an empire of its own. Westward, on the islands and peninsulas of the Aegean, the Greeks inherited the fragments and began to refine them. Where Babylon had observed, Greece began to question. Observation became theory. Theory became philosophy. In Miletus, Thales proposed that nature obeyed laws, not whims. In Samos, Pythagoras saw harmony between numbers and music. Hippocrates redefined medicine as logic applied to the body. And in Athens, Plato and Aristotle argued that the search for truth was itself the noblest human act. They built their temples not only to gods, but to proportion. The Parthenon stands as geometry made visible, a building that appears perfect precisely because its proportions are imperceptibly curved to correct optical illusion. It is a lesson in perception. Knowledge not as dogma, but as adjustment. The Greeks did not invent curiosity. They gave it structure. Yet even their brilliance had ancestry. When Alexander of Macedon swept eastward, he carried with him the torch of inquiry. And from the ashes of his conquests arose the greatest library the ancient world would ever know. Alexandria, founded on Egypt's coast, was meant to be more than a city. It was to be the memory of civilization itself. Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's successors, gathered scholars from every known land, housing them in the Museion, a sanctuary of the muses where art and science met. Within its marble halls, astronomers, poets, mathematicians, and engineers worked side by side, their language a blend of Greek, Egyptian, and Babylonian. The library that grew beside it became a world in paper form. Estimates vary, but ancient accounts speak of hundreds of thousands of scrolls, texts purchased, copied, or seized from every ship that entered the harbor. If a vessel carried books, scribes took them, copied them, and returned replicas to their owners. The originals stayed in Alexandria. Knowledge, for the first time, was centralized, catalogued, and preserved. Here, Euclid refined geometry into logical proof. Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the earth, using nothing but shadows and distance. Archimedes, though working in Sicily, corresponded with its scholars, designing machines that embodied mathematical laws. Hero of Alexandria built devices powered by steam and wind, automatic doors, water organs, even a rotating sphere driven by vapor pressure. They were experiments as artful as they were mechanical, glimpses of what technology might have become if time had flowed differently. The scholars of Alexandria did not separate disciplines. Astronomy was physics, physics was philosophy, and philosophy was theology. They believed all knowledge formed a single structure, and to understand one part was to glimpse the whole. Within that unity lay their greatness and their vulnerability. For when fire came, it consumed everything together. Accounts differ on when and how the library burned. Some say during Caesar's civil war in 48 BC, others during later conflicts, still others in the religious purges of the 4th century AD. Each explanation holds a grain of truth, for the destruction was not one event, but many. Fire returned again and again, until nothing remained but ash and rumor. Thousands of scrolls, the accumulated mind of the ancient world, turned to smoke over the harbor that had once gathered them. The loss is impossible to measure. Among the ashes may have vanished the final works of Aristotle, the complete histories of Egypt and Mesopotamia, treatises on engineering, medicine, and philosophy, centuries ahead of their rediscovery. The Antikythera mechanism, found centuries later in a sunken Greek ship, may well have been a child of Alexandria's workshops, a relic of its mechanical imagination. The tragedy of the library endures because it represents more than burned paper. It is the story of knowledge's fragility, how progress depends not only on discovery, but on preservation. For every genius who invents, another must remember. The flame that lights understanding can just as easily consume it. Even so, Alexandria's spirit never fully died. Its scholars had trained generations who carried fragments east and west into Byzantine academies, Persian observatories, and the universities of the Islamic Golden Age. From their translations would one day emerge the Renaissance itself. The chain of inheritance survived through devotion, not empire. In that sense, Alexandria did not end. It transformed. Its vision of a single human library, united across borders, remains the blueprint of every archive, every university, every database built since. The dream that knowledge could belong to all people was born there, between sea and desert, under the same stars once studied in Babylon. The guardians of lost knowledge were never only the scholars who wrote it, but also those who copied, carried, and whispered it through centuries of silence. Their legacy is not measured in what they created, but in what they refused to let disappear. Civilization's greatest monument is not the pyramid or the temple, but the book, fragile, flammable, endlessly reborn. From clay to parchment, from scroll to screen, it bears the same message as the stones of the ancients. Remember. And so, the light of Alexandria still flickers, not in a building of marble and fire, but in every human effort to keep the past alive, in every word written against the dark, in every act of preservation that defies the night. By the time the last embers of Alexandria cooled, the world had changed its map of knowledge. What survived of Greece and Babylon wandered through translation, hidden in monasteries, mosques, and royal courts. The old empires were gone, but their thoughts moved quietly across deserts and seas, smuggled in parchment, sung in prayer, illuminated in ink. The Middle Ages, far from being an age of darkness, became a time of recovery, an era that looked backward to move forward, that dreamed of light while living in shadow. In the east, the torch passed first to Baghdad. When the Abbasid caliphs built their capital on the Tigris, they declared that learning itself was a form of devotion. Within its walls rose the House of Wisdom, a translation school, observatory, and academy combined. Scholars from Syria, Persia, India, and Byzantium gathered there to render the world's knowledge into Arabic. They translated Euclid, Archimedes, Ptolemy, Galen, and in doing so, preserved the structure of ancient science long after its originators had vanished. Translation soon became transformation. The mathematician Al-Khwarizmi systematized equations into algebra, giving mathematics the universal grammar it had lacked. Ibn Sina or Avicenna synthesized Greek medicine with Persian observation, producing encyclopedias that guided physicians for centuries. Astronomers mapped the heavens with refinements unknown to Ptolemy, and alchemists in Damascus experimented with acids and distillation, turning mystical speculation into chemistry. Baghdad's workshops hummed with astrolabes, water clocks, and celestial globes, their craftsmanship matching any marvel of antiquity. Knowledge followed trade routes, from Samarkand to Cordoba, from Cairo to Palermo. The old world's fragments met and multiplied. In Andalusia, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish scholars studied side by side. The libraries of Cordoba and Toledo rivaled the memory of Alexandria, housing hundreds of thousands of volumes. There, translators bridged centuries, rendering Arabic texts back into Latin so Europe could rediscover what it had once forgotten. Science, long thought lost, returned through the very lands that had once been called barbarian. The compass from China, the numerals of India, and the algebra of Baghdad converged in Europe's restless cities. The medieval scholar was not an inventor so much as a reconciler, one who sought to unite reason with revelation. Every experiment carried theological risk, every discovery a hint of heresy. But the hunger to understand proved stronger than fear. Alchemy became the language of this search, half science, half prayer. In its smoky chambers, philosophers and experimenters tried to perfect matter, and through it, themselves. They believed that metal was a living thing, growing in the womb of the earth toward eventual purity. If it could be hastened, lead might become gold. Imperfection might be refined into truth. Beneath that metaphor lay genuine experimentation. Distillation, sublimation, crystallization. Out of those obsessions came real chemistry. The Byzantine Empire, for its part, preserved secrets both spiritual and material. Among them was the formula for Greek fire, a weapon so terrifying it seemed supernatural. It burned on water, clung to ships, and could not be extinguished. The exact recipe was guarded as state treasure, its components known only to a handful of chemists. With it, Byzantium defended its coasts for centuries. Even today, the formula remains uncertain. Petroleum, lime, resin, and mystery. The medieval echo of a lost ancient science. In Europe's monasteries, another form of alchemy unfolded. Monks bent over manuscripts, copying and illuminating texts in silence. Their inks and pigments were chemical experiments in themselves. Crushed lapis for blue, gold leaf for light, vermilion for power. These scriptoria became laboratories of memory, where the act of preservation was both physical and spiritual. When paper finally replaced parchment, knowledge quickened its pace again. The universities that emerged in Paris, Bologna, and Oxford grew out of that monastic tradition. They married reason to faith, law to language. The cathedral school became a proto-laboratory, where geometry was studied as divine order and music as the mathematics of sound. The philosophers of scholasticism, Aquinas, Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, debated how faith could contain logic and whether the natural world could be tested without offending heaven. They built their arguments like cathedrals, with pillars of reasoning and spires of speculation. Their architecture mirrored their thought. The great Gothic cathedrals were feats of engineering disguised as prayer. Flying buttresses, pointed arches, ribbed vaults, each innovation solved a mathematical problem in stone. Light was their medium, structure their theology. The builders who calculated their stresses were not lesser minds than the astronomers of Babylon, only differently inspired. To them, geometry was revelation, physics a form of praise. Farther east, other traditions thrived. In India, scholars of the Gupta and Chola periods refined mathematics to breathtaking heights. They understood zero as a number in its own right, not an absence, but a presence of potential, a concept that transformed calculation forever. Astronomers like Aryabhata and Brahmagupta measured planetary motion with trigonometric precision, while metallurgists in Delhi forged the iron pillar that has resisted rust for more than 15 centuries. Their methods of alloying and passivation remain partly unexplained, a metallurgical enigma that outlasted its makers. In the Islamic world, alchemists pushed the limits of practical experimentation. The polymath Jabir ibn Hayyan developed apparatus for distillation and crystallization, still recognizable in modern laboratories. He recorded reactions meticulously, treating observation as sacred duty. In his work, the dream of Alexandria's mechanists flickered again, the conviction that the universe obeyed principles waiting to be revealed through patience and craft. The same light glowed in Persia's observatories, where scholars like Nasir al-Din al-Tusi designed instruments capable of predicting planetary positions with astonishing accuracy. His geometric models anticipated later European innovations. When his manuscripts reached the hands of Copernicus centuries later, echoes of Tusi's mathematics would help redefine the cosmos once again. Through all this motion, one pattern persisted, the rebirth of curiosity from the bones of memory. Every rediscovery was also a reinvention. A Greek theorem translated into Arabic, refined in Samarkand, retranslated into Latin, and copied in Paris became something new each time. Not repetition, but evolution. Knowledge did not travel intact, it transformed. Europe's later thinkers inherited this layered tradition. Paracelsus, wandering physician and alchemist of the 16th century, rejected superstition, yet kept the symbolism. To him, chemistry was divine anatomy, the study of how spirit condensed into matter. His experiments bridged magic and medicine, faith and empiricism. Through him and others, the boundary between mystic and scientist blurred, setting the stage for modern inquiry. By the late Middle Ages, invention accelerated. Mechanical clocks ticked in monastery towers. Glassmakers in Venice perfected lenses that magnified vision, and with it, understanding. The printing press spread ideas faster than any empire could suppress them. Knowledge, once guarded in gilded rooms, now flowed through streets and markets. The medieval world, which had begun in the ashes of Alexandria, ended in a storm of words and diagrams, a new renaissance already stirring. It is tempting to call this progress, but the story feels more like recurrence. The pattern repeats: preservation, translation, transformation. From Alexandria to Baghdad, from Toledo to Florence, every age has rebuilt the bridge between wonder and understanding. The medieval mind did not invent science. It remembered it through faith, through metal, through ink. Its legacy is the proof that knowledge can sleep for centuries and still awaken, changed but alive. The scholars and artisans of that age were not inventors in the modern sense. They were guardians in disguise, keeping the pulse of curiosity alive until the world was ready to listen again. And in their echo, in the rhythm of the forge, the chant of the scribe, the alignment of star and stone, the lost sciences of the ancients continued to breathe. Every civilization leaves behind a sound. Sometimes it is the clang of metal or the murmur of prayer. Sometimes it is only the hush that follows when the tools fall still. What remains when the voices fade is not ruin, but residue, the outline of thought, the shadow of genius. The story of humanity is not one of steady ascent, but of rediscovery. Each age inherits the fragments of the last, rebuilds what it can, and calls the result new. Across the jungles of the Yucatan, that rhythm of loss played out again. The Maya, masters of mathematics and time, carved their calendars into stone so precise that they still track the motion of Venus to the day. They built cities like mirrors of the cosmos, each pyramid aligned to a celestial event, each plaza designed to echo the solstice sun. Their script, hieroglyphs alive with faces, animals, and geometry, preserved history, law, astronomy. For centuries they mapped not only the sky but the human heart. Then, almost imperceptibly, the cities emptied. Temples were abandoned, stelae left unfinished. Drought, war, or exhaustion, no single cause can explain it. The jungle closed over their avenues, vines growing through the mouths of stone kings. When the first Europeans arrived a millennium later, they found only silence and the faint sound of rain, like fingers tapping on forgotten calendars. Far across the ocean, another silence spread. The temples of Angkor, once the jewel of the Khmer Empire, sank into the Cambodian forest. Its engineers had mastered hydraulics on a scale unmatched in medieval Europe. Canals, reservoirs, and sluices that transformed monsoon into harvest. Their network turned water into architecture, the city itself a living circuit. But when climate shifted and politics fractured, the system failed. Water that had once obeyed human rhythm returned to its own. The jungle reclaimed the rest. To the north, in Greenland's icy fjords, the Vikings who had crossed the Atlantic vanished without battle or plague. Their farms, once green, froze beneath shorter summers. As ice advanced and trade retreated, they abandoned their settlements and sailed into legend. What remained were churches without congregations, tools rusted into silence, and the faint memory of people who had once believed they had reached the edge of the world. On a Pacific island, barely visible on modern maps, another kind of monument endured. The Moai statues of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, stand gazing inland, guardians of an island stripped of its trees. The people who carved them had mastered stone, but not sustainability. When the forests fell, so did the boats that carried hope beyond the horizon. Their art became their prison, their devotion their undoing. It is the most human of endings. A people who built too much and left themselves too little. Even the mighty empires of the old world were not immune. The Indus Valley, the Hittites, the Minoans, the Olmec, all vanished into layers of soil. The reasons differ, the rhythm does not. Flood, drought, invasion, or simple forgetting. Each erasure feels familiar. Progress never truly dies. It drifts. One civilization's catastrophe becomes another's foundation. The knowledge that sinks in one age resurfaces in another, changed but recognizable, like light refracted through time. When the Library of Alexandria burned, scrolls of geometry and medicine were lost, but their echoes resurfaced in Baghdad's observatories. When Baghdad fell to invasion, its scholars carried memory to Damascus and Cairo. When those cities waned, the manuscripts traveled to Cordoba, to Venice, to Oxford. Every destruction scattered knowledge like seeds. Fire, paradoxically, became the agent of preservation, spreading fragments far enough that no single blaze could consume them all. Memory's endurance depends not on monuments, but on movement. The marble crumbles, but the idea of symmetry survives. The metal corrodes, but the method of smelting passes on. Even myths, Atlantis, Lemuria, the flood, are vessels of remembrance. Beneath their poetry lies evidence of collective trauma, of civilizations remembering themselves through story. Each legend is a kind of archive, less literal, but no less true. Today we call ourselves modern, but our foundations are ancient. Our mathematics still counts in 60s. Our constellations bear Babylonian names. Our architecture follows Egyptian ratios. Our philosophy walks the same paths laid by Athens. We are, at heart, archivists of the forgotten. Every circuit board, every telescope, every algorithm is a continuation of the same desire that lit the first forge: to understand, to measure, to endure. Yet even we are not immune to forgetting. The more knowledge multiplies, the faster it risks being lost, not to flame, but to indifference. Data can vanish as swiftly as parchment, swallowed not by fire, but by silence. The vanishing of memory is not a single event. It is a habit of civilizations that assume permanence. The ancients built in stone because they feared time. We build in code and imagine ourselves eternal. Archaeologists who unearth the past often find what they were never looking for: evidence of humility. A buried tool still sharp, a broken tablet inscribed with a prayer, a handprint on a cave wall. Each fragment reminds us that progress is not linear but circular, that genius is not invention but remembrance. The ancients did not always know less. They simply knew differently. Their monuments were libraries, their myths equations, their rituals experiments. Perhaps that is the true continuity, not the survival of any one civilization, but the persistence of curiosity. Long after cities fall, curiosity remains, wandering among ruins, asking the same questions with new voices. Who built this? How did they live? What did they believe? Every answer leads to another mystery, another threshold where imagination meets evidence. In the end, the earth reclaims everything. Stone returns to dust, dust to soil, soil to seed. What endures is intention, the will to make meaning from the raw material of existence. The forgotten engineers, astronomers, healers, and poets of the past did not fail. They left a trail. Their greatest creation was not the pyramid, the temple, or the city, but the idea that knowledge can be rebuilt. When we gaze at the stars mapped by hands 5,000 years dead, or walk beneath arches aligned to solstices older than empires, we are not merely observing the past. We are participating in it. We are the continuation of that same experiment, the human attempt to transform curiosity into permanence. The vanishing of memory, then, is never complete. Somewhere, in stone or code or heartbeat, it remains. The ancients built for eternity. We remember them for reminding us how brief eternity truly is. And so, the circle closes, not with silence, but with understanding. The civilizations that vanished have not disappeared. They have become the foundation beneath our feet, the whisper beneath our words. Their stories end only when we stop telling them. Until then, the echo continues. Across centuries, across ruins, across every spark that lights the dark. The world forgets. The world remembers. That, perhaps, is our truest invention.